Hello, my name is Bill Haley, and this is for Haley 2024, The Movement's Government Reform Ideas. Now, this video is going to be about my respect for the current U.S. Constitution. Yes, I'm asking for it to be 100% changed in a radical way, changing the foundations of government. But we are not living under the U.S. Constitution anymore in a real sense. Let's go through it. I want to build on what was great about the U.S. Constitution, take what's great in it, and create a better system. So I created a better system, but it doesn't mean I don't like the U.S. Constitution, but we're just not living under it. Let's go through a lot of aspects of it. So, America has led the world in freedom, liberty, and individual rights. That has lifted the standard of living, reduced political violence, conflict, and progressively promoted justice. Without a doubt, the Constitution created that. Started about 250 years ago. And it really changed the world. In world history, we have never advanced more than under the U.S. Constitution. The current U.S. Constitution is a major part of the advancement of people's peaceful interaction with each other. Throughout the world, they saw America's example, and more people have moved towards democracy, justice, constitutional rights. Not everywhere, but we have pulled the world's poverty level up dramatically. So many people were in poverty 100 years ago and before. A high percentage of the world's population. Now it's down significantly. We have gotten so much better since we started the U.S. Constitution. It has advanced liberty dramatically. And I'm proud to be an American and live under the U.S. Constitution. We keep the separation of powers, and we separate it like crazy more under my system. We keep checks and balances. And we have a lot better checks and balances. Well, the U.S. Constitution held back government overreach, the government's growth, the infringements of liberty, the loss of rights, the political conflicts over monopolized control by government of an ever-increasing part of our economy has reached a point that renders the U.S. constitutional limitations ineffectual. About 100 years ago, we had government under 5% of GDP, the federal government at least. And the state government wasn't that much higher. Now we're well over 40, 41, 42, and in 2020, it jumped well over 50%. Really, growth of government, monopolized. The Constitution does not allow that. The current U.S. Constitution. America is not even close to living under the U.S. Constitution now. Our currency is not constitutional. When we read the Constitution, and it's used as a tax. The inflation tax, it's easily proven that it's used as a tax. The Constitution doesn't allow that, but we do it. Public education violates the U.S. Constitution significantly. I have a full video on that, how it just totally violates it. Not just from the federal government not allowing education in the first place because it's not one of the listed authorized things, but the First Amendment and some of the other amendments, like the 14th Amendment, the 4th Amendment, does not allow even the state or local governments to do public education the way they're doing it. Welfare is not listed as an authorized federal authority. And even though it's allowed to be there under the state constitutions, that just shows that the state constitution is not that good. So the welfare system is doing so much harm to the poor. And the poor in this country, yeah, they have always been getting better. But the welfare system stopped the progress of the poor coming out of poverty. And the welfare system about 50 years ago really put the brakes on many people coming out of poverty. It's really holding people back. And the charity system under my constitutional amendment is significantly better. The important work of helping the poor is undermined by government welfare. Just kind of said that. Healthcare is not listed as an authorized federal authority. How can we be doing anything like Medicaid, Medicare, Health and Human Resources, Obamacare, the health savings accounts? How can we be paying for healthcare through the tax code, or supplementing it, or subsidizing it, and to a large degree penalizing and infringing on business models? We're doing so many bad things in healthcare, but they're not allowed to do it. Now, the states are allowed to under the Constitution, which means the state constitutions aren't that great, because it allows government to get into healthcare. I mean, it allows government to take away our rights to our healthcare. Government does not give us our rights to healthcare by giving us healthcare. Giving us healthcare dramatically takes away our rights to our healthcare. People get it so wrong so often. But it's not authorized under the federal Constitution. But it also does not stop states from doing it. It should. And in mine it will. Or at least you get to have the way you want it. And you have to look at my Constitution. This video is strictly on we're not living under our Constitution. And even though we are living under state constitutions aren't that great. And what we're doing is not that great. We can do a lot better. Even though we are still the shining city within the world, the shining country that's pulling people out of poverty, we are being throttled so much by what we're doing. We can be doing it so much better. Social Security is not even close to being constitutional. Not even close. I don't care what the Supreme Court is supposed to be protecting the U.S. Constitution. They're just flat out not. And it's sad, but they're not. In the state, they might be allowed to do it. They shouldn't. Under mine, not so much. So there's ways we handle. We go into free enterprise in my Constitution, and all these things. But we have obligation of the citizens to make sure a lot of these things are taken care of within certain systems. You're just going to have to go through my system to show you how it's so much better. But this is my respect for the U.S. Constitution and saying that we're not abiding by it, and my dislike for many state constitutions and what it allows the government to do to us, not for us. And government doing stuff for us other than protecting our liberty is not for us. It is to us in a bad way. 90% of the federal regulations, and I'm not sure if 90% is exact, but the federal government's not allowed to do regulations. Their responsibility is to say states cannot, they have to have regular trade between each other, and they cannot do trade wars between different states. It's to make it regular. The Commerce Clause and those clauses, they were about making states make trade regular between the states. It's silly to say that the federal government can only do interstate regulations. And we're not even close to being constitutional when it comes to regulations. The new amendment that I'm proposing is a full replacement of the U.S. Constitution, but it's also a replacement of the state constitution and creates a local constitution. We still have 3 levels of government, each one with the exact same constitution, with federal responsibilities, state responsibilities, local responsibilities. We have a full system for that. So it keeps 3 levels of government. It still keeps 3 executive, judicial, and legislative branches. But it also separates governmental power tremendously. We'll get into it. This amendment has much stronger protections of civil liberties. So civil liberties are not protected right now under our U.S. Constitution. We say we have the freedom of speech. It's being violated over and over again. We claim to have freedom of religion, and that is under attack and being infringed significantly in many different aspects. We say we have the freedom of Second Amendment, and that is infringed significantly. So there's a lot of infringements on our civil liberties, and my Constitution really puts some really strong civil liberties into the whole system. Our current system of representation is significantly insufficient. My Constitution creates representation of the people. How do you even come close to thinking that we have one congressman representing 800,000 people? What needs to be represented? Somebody's opinions, somebody's interest, somebody's position on whether they want to go to war or not to go to war. So if 400,000 people say, I want to go to war, and 400,000 people say, vote no on going to war, how can you represent all of them? But you have one representative representing all of them? Are you even representing the majority? When you had primaries on the Democrat side and the Republican side, and only one person came out of each side? And what if they voted for you because of your education policy and not your prison policy or not your going to war policy? We don't know whether you're represented or not on many issues. I know I am not represented by my representatives at the local, state, or federal. Sometimes my candidate even wins. I'm still not represented by them because I don't agree with them on 90% of the stuff. But the other guy was just worse. And a lot of people think that way. A lot of people in the 2016, 2020, basically every presidential election, the hold your nose voter is stronger than people who want one of the two candidates. At least it's a pretty high percentage. This CRA amendment results in a much better representative system. It just does. I have you're going to be represented by a lot more people, and you get to pick them by the sector. You get to pick somebody to represent you on police, and you can just concentrate your vote on just police. And another vote you can concentrate just on prisons. And another vote you can concentrate just on family law. But not only that, you get to actually select your governing agency. I know we haven't talked about it in this video, but because this video is just about my respect for the U.S. Constitution, but my system's so much better. I'm not saying it's just to brag, but when you have better representation and competitive governance, that's just going to create a better system. So, much more separation of powers. The president being over family law, that's crazy. The president being over education, the same guy, it's crazy. He's over top of banking law, that's crazy. Each one of these needs 20, 30, 40 years of good, strong study and working in that industry. We don't need the same guy talking about prison policy, making laws on prison policy, as somebody making laws on family law. And somebody dealing with helping the poor. And making foreign policy. But we have the same people making those laws. And to be honest with you, those laws come down from the higher ups, from a small group, and they say, vote on this 1,000-page piece of legislation in 4 hours. And you just have to give it up or down. It's crazy how we make laws. Our legislature, they're not making laws in any way, shape, or form that has good representation. This amendment allows socialists to be socialist without affecting citizens that wish to be free. So if you want to be capitalist, you're not affected by the socialist. They can be socialist within their group. You don't get their benefits. You don't pay their taxes. The socialist, you don't have to pay the capitalist or the free enterprise guys benefits. Within your group, you be socialist. And it's kind of like insurance is right now. You're in your group with your insurance company, and everybody's together, and insurance has elements of socialism in it. But it's in a competitive nature, and you choose to go into it. So a lot of the negative effects goes away. A lot of negative effects of governance goes away when you can choose to change your governing agency. This amendment limits federal control to foreign policy with few and limited exceptions. To a large degree, the federal government was set up to handle foreign affairs and not to handle everything that it's handling now. But it's handling a lot more than just the military and foreign policy. They were not created to handle all the regulate all the banking, to regulate healthcare, to regulate family law. They weren't there to do that, but they are. This amendment significantly takes away governmental monopoly control. The base of the amendment I want to create is competitive governing agencies. They're called competitive regulatory agencies, but they govern, they regulate, and they send representatives up. So we have a lot better way of doing representatives, because within your group of like-minded people that you selected to match that philosophy, you are sending representatives up from your percentage. That group has a percentage of the population. Let's say it's 8% of the population think the way you think. And they put out a philosophy and a mission statement. And you go in there with like 8% of the citizens. And those 8% of the citizens are like-minded. And then you pick representatives from there to send up in the legislative. You send that vote in the executive. But to a large degree, 90% of it, the governing happens within your group. The framers of the Constitution had many arguments. Back in 1700s, 1787 I think it was, the framers of the Constitution, they had a lot of arguments. They had a lot of disagreements, just like liberals and conservatives have now. Democrats and Republicans have arguments in the Congress all the time right now. They did also. There were people that disagree with each other significantly. We cannot just say the founding fathers had views of the Constitution, because you had different sides. You had factions back then. You had disagreements back then. Do you think the best choice was always one that created the Constitution? No, obviously not. There's constitutional amendments that were proposed and never signed into law. Did not get enough states to support them. The framers of the Constitution did not have the ability to look at the 230 years of results. So right now we're about 230 years into America under the U.S. Constitution. The framers did not have the knowledge of what we have now. We're much better read than the founders. People can say the founders were well read. I'm sorry, but we have the internet. We can read people's opinions, and we can listen to scholars, and we can listen to debates. They just didn't have that. I'm not trying to say I'm that much better than the founders, by no means. But I've heard many more things than the founders, because a lot of people that were born after them said many strong things and had the experience of what they started. So while I can appreciate what the founders did, and I can build upon the good nature of separation of powers, of the legislative branch and the executive branch and limited government, I can build on those. But I can also see where we went wrong. Not where the Constitution went wrong, but where the Congress their powers were outside the constitutional boundaries, and significantly outside the constitutional boundaries. Education and welfare are not even close to being constitution, and not even close to being the best way to do it because it's within government. Helping the poor should never be a governmental responsibility. Education should never be a governmental responsibility. But if you want it to be, you can choose a governmental CRA, competitive government agency, to do those things for you. Because at least as a competitive governance, you're in competition with others. And people know that you can take your business, any parent can take their business elsewhere. Religion and association liberties are infringed by government education and government welfare. It just is. I could go on for hours on that subject. The freedom to sell your labor is infringed under the current system. The U.S. Constitution never has our current U.S. Constitution does not have a clause in it saying that the federal government can limit and infringe your ability to do contracts for labor. It just doesn't. But we do it. Overtime laws, minimum wage laws, overtime laws and minimum wage law. All the laws dealing with labor. Those are just infringements on our liberty to do contracts. Mutual agreed upon contracts. Now, the state does have the ability to limit that, but it shouldn't. Having a competitive governance, yeah, they can do it. But monopolized governments, it's a bad idea. 80% of federal spending is not within the listed federal powers. Now, it's not exactly 80%. I don't know what it is, but I know it's way up there. The military is within the governmental authority. But we're doing a lot more than the military. Most regulations stop activity that does not harm people outside the people agreeing to the transaction. Now, my Constitution, monopolized governance over everybody in the jurisdiction, has to deal with a negative externality. When you're doing harm outside of the agreement, where people don't agree to it. Polluting and doing different things is where monopolized governments can come in and put a stop to doing harm outside of government. But my rating system can take care of that without doing a ton of regulations, monopolized regulations at least. So if this is the first video you've seen, that might not make sense to you. You have to read the Constitution and look at a lot of my reforms. But we are doing so much now, with whether it's state, local, or federal, that has nothing to do with negative externalities. They claim it might, but it's not even close to dealing with negative externalities. And actually, they're creating negative externalities with their very bad laws. Because quite frankly, a legislator or a governor, they just don't have the brain power to handle so much of what they're doing. Spending close to $8 trillion in a year, they don't have that kind of knowledge, not even close. And I mean, look at how much they're over. I mean, over 400 and some agencies in the federal government. There's no way any one person can handle that. One person can't even handle one of the agencies without having a tremendous amount of help. But then they're monopolized. So my system does competitive. It's much better. Many regulations stop viable business models. The federal Constitution does not allow that. It does not authorize that. But it does it. I mean, in healthcare, it does it tremendously. Energy law does it tremendously. I mean, a lot of areas it does that. The U.S. Constitution only controls the federal government. The states need to be restricted as well. Now, some of the civil liberties go down to the state level because of the 14th Amendment. I understand that. Doesn't mean they abide by it. They allow, it depends on whether or not the current politicians want it to happen or not, to be honest with you. And the Supreme Court is definitely not protecting the U.S. Constitution as it's their job. because they're just getting the political feedback so hard that they need to allow infringements on the Constitution. Now, the people who wanted the U.S. Constitution, they need to be fighting back politically, but within our current system, we cannot give proper feedback and proper fight back with a good representation, with the rating system and the CRAs. You have organizations there to do and represent what you want to help control your liberty, to maintain your liberty. Not control liberty, to control the size of government, to let us have our liberty. The U.S. Constitution only controls the federal government. I just said that. Okay. The road system is socialism. It's totally constitutional. Maybe not federal constitution, but they get away with it by saying we need it for the military. But even the state government, they say, well, the state government has to do roads. Not even close. I mean, it's a natural market. Everybody wants to drive. It's a natural market. People are going to have roads. We have control. So we go to a full private road system under my systems because we don't want socialism. Socialism never works better than the free enterprise system. But we have a lot of controls because free enterprise does not mean just do what you wish. The education is currently socialism. Free enterprise is better. And if you don't want to go free enterprise, you can go to a CRA that does public school type of stuff. But you cannot force other people to go in there with you. And we'll have separate videos on a lot of that stuff. State constitutions are not great. They're not very limiting. They don't limit the size of government. It has a full general power, general authority. A general grant of power to the state legislature of government authority. And you might have some civil liberties that kind of hold some government back a little bit. But government is growing, and we're infringing on liberties all over the place. And we're going more socialist. When government does it, it is the definition of socialism. So we need to go more private police, private education, private helping the poor, all these things. Now, when I say private, it can be competitive regulatory agencies, so it's governmental, but within your group. This CRA Constitution is just better. It just is. Now, this is the model of the government that I want, that I'm proposing. This is what's giving the government its power. And this is how it separates that out. 30 sectors. We separate all government power into 30. So the people in charge of the police are not the same people in charge of the family law. The people in charge of insurance is not the same people in charge of the military. We separate that out. And then we create CRAs that every person can select. Every business selects their CRA, who wants to govern them. And you're not going to just pick one with the lowest standards, because nobody wants to walk into a restaurant with low food safety standards. You know, the rating agency is going to tell everybody with a sign on the door what their rating is, their food safety standards, or how are their labor standards, or how is their environmental standards. So if you have somebody just polluting like crazy, it will be shown on the point of purchase of when they're purchasing something. And that the rating agency will make sure people understand that they are polluters, or they are not handling food safely, or they're not handling banking correctly and they're discriminating, or they are doing something wrong, according to the rating agency. So that's where the rating agency can come in super important. So this is about a 30-minute video. There's a lot more to see on my website. You can go look at the structure, but I wanted to tell you how I love the U.S. Constitution, and I wish we can get back to it. But even if we got back to it, we could do better. I've learned from the U.S. Constitution what it's doing and how it's doing it, but we can do so much better, I believe. So look around on my website, Haley2024.org, and until the next video. I will have a lot of videos up there between February and March of 2021. I did a whole bunch of videos about a year ago, but plan on to have a lot more videos coming up soon. Until the next video.